Good afternoon. How are we doing? It feels like a big break that for me. I was last on Friday. Then we had the bank holiday. No, I wasn't, was I? That was last on Thursday. Then we had the big bank holiday. Then I had the First Steps gang covering their usual Tuesday slot. So it's pretty much a week off. So you've all had a rest from me. I've been dying to talk to you all, as you know. Obsessed with that. And fortunately, I jumped back into a show that I've been really looking forward to for a while. It's Wellbeing Wednesday, first Wednesday of the month. And so my friend and colleague, Joe Turner, the host of the You Matter podcast, the exuberant director of MeHab, and now MeHub. Oh, classic. All right, there's the phone going off. I got that in my office. One sec. Let's not answer that on air. That'd be unfair, wouldn't it? So yes, Joe's joining to talk about Imposter Syndrome. That's something that's kind of come up a lot recently, and so I'm really keen to discuss that with her. I'll tell you what I will do, because that phone might ring again. It being on my desk, not a good idea. I will hopefully, in a couple of clicks, bring in my co-host for today, Joe Turner. Joe, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, fine.
Oh, I don't like you being that side of the screen. Let's change that over. That's better. I feel I don't want that too much change all at once. Could you tell the audience a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today, Imposter Syndrome, as I go and hide this phone before so it doesn't interrupt us again?
Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah. So Imposter Syndrome is a phrase that I think I've been aware of a little bit since school days, actually. But since I've been a health professional, I've been much more aware of it personally, had lots of conversations about it. And certainly when I'm coaching health professionals, it's something that other people bring up. So I think it is a phrase that's probably more and more in the vocabulary of health professionals. I don't necessarily have to bring it up as a subject. It seems to be something people are quite aware of. Jack, do you want me to just explain a little bit about the traits of imposter syndrome, just in case people are less familiar with it? That'd be a helpful start.
Yeah, I think so. Also, the context of this is such that you might, sorry if you've just mentioned this, but you did a podcast recently on this for You Matter, which is the next one that's out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Out on Sunday. And it's something that is therefore, I think, sometimes thrown around a little bit, but people don't necessarily know those details. So yeah, I definitely want to jump into that, but also just to let people know that this will be an intro to a wider conversation about such topics later on in the week through You Matter. So yeah, do go on, Joe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a whole hour podcast with a friend of mine, Margaret Collins, who's a real expert on this subject. And to be honest, Margaret's helped me bring a little more specificity into the definition. So imposter syndrome isn't a medically diagnosable condition. It's a syndrome, if you like, and a set of feelings which you may be aware of to a greater or lesser extent, depending on your personality makeup, your experience, maybe just the conversations you have around work and the way you feel about it. But common traits that Margaret has educated me to are the sort of generalized feeling of not feeling good enough, but specifically this sense that you're just waiting for the moment where you get found out. So someone exposes your lack of medical knowledge or your lack of tech skill or something, that sense that you're getting by, but you're just bluffing it, and there will be a moment where someone finds that out and exposes it. Flip side of that is if you do have success, then possibly you struggle to own it, and you would tend to attribute your success either to other people. You might say, I had this great mentor or this coach that just told me this stuff, and that's how I achieved what I achieved. Or you might attribute things to luck. So you might say, well, I was just in the right place at the right time, rather than acknowledging that actually you'd probably put an awful lot of preparation into making sure that when an opportunity came along, you were ready to grab it. So yes, there's luck in the fact that the opportunity comes, but you tend to underplay the fact that you massively prepared yourself to be ready to take that opportunity. And then two other things that Margaret talks about. One of them I find really interesting, and she says this is perhaps more common in women, that it's almost a shame trigger to admit that you work hard on things. So you're supposed to be amazing, you're supposed to be brilliant, and the subtext is that you're supposed to make it look really easy and not tell people about all that preparation and that hard work that you put in. And one flip side of that, which Margaret highlights, is that for that reason, you're probably not very likely to talk about imposter syndrome, because that would imply that you're working hard to make sure that you're always perfect and that everything is fine. And so you think you're the only one feeling like this, and it's kind of a repeating cycle. And then the final thing, which probably ties in a little bit to current discussions around equality and discrimination and equal opportunities, is she says that people often feel other. So they don't feel that they quite fit into the community or the work environment. And that breeds a sense of, who am I to do this? Because people like me don't achieve X. People like me don't belong in this particular work environment. People like me don't rise to these positions. And I find that quite interesting in the current climate. So really, it's those parameters that Margaret defines as traits of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and certainly something that, like you mentioned, that identity piece that we've discussed together on this show and beyond is important to that. I suppose I want to just invite the audience to get stuck into this. Is that something that you recognise? Have you heard of imposter syndrome? Is it something you feel you suffer with? If you do, is that very context specific as to what it is you're doing, or is that something that you just naturally live with? You're constantly in that sense. You were always feeling like you're on the cusp of being found out. I've never really thought of it as literally as that with regards to what it is that you're suggesting that you're an imposter of. Although it's something that I think I recognise in myself. For me, it's certainly more context specific. It's something that I feel at a moment's notice, including 30 seconds notice today. Joe, I swan in, checking the tech, not turn the microphone on, and we go live. That, to me, speaks to a lack of imposter syndrome in the fact that I will shoot the shit about anything on this subject matter, really, and not necessarily mine. But I think some of that has come from some training as to realising that there is a sort of underlying self-confidence as to the subject matter. Whereas if I was coming on today and a moment's notice it was particle physics, then potentially that's where it's an issue. One of the questions I have really is, I think that it seems to me, I just realised it's not a question, it's a comment that I want to see your opinion on. It gets mixed in a little bit with regards to the genuine imposter syndrome as you've described it, whereby people feel like they've got an unjustified sense that they don't really deserve to give their opinion in this direction. However, there's also, that gets sort of lumped in with this notion of very genuine sense of humility and good fortune. Like there is something to be said for recognising that we are not necessarily always true arbiters of our fortune, and that the sense of self and free will being somewhat of an illusion in the fact that we don't always direct exactly the nth degree of our own destiny. And that sense of understanding that fortune means that really that's not, to me, as accurate as a description of imposter syndrome as the bit that you've just described. Or do you think that actually I'm overplaying that and that's part of mine?
Just describe that last bit in a bit more detail, Jack. Sorry, the sound isn't brilliant, so it was quite quiet. But when you were talking about not being in control of your own destiny, just explain that to me a bit more.
So, for me, and this is where I might just be projecting my opinion, but as far as my reading is, in terms of the way that the world works, is such that I don't necessarily. I think that there is many things outside of our control, and we are in, whilst not complete perpetual free motion, there is a sense that we have not got a libertarian sense of free will. We are not necessarily dictating on a moment-to-moment basis what's going to happen. There are lots of inevitable things that are occurring to us in such a way that recognising that, and then recognising that your opportunity to enact any change is somewhat constrained by those forces, is, to me, just an enlightened sense of understanding the way of the world. And there can come some contentment that comes from that. But it's just that for me is slightly different to what you described as imposter syndrome.
Yeah, no, I get it a bit more. So what I would say you're describing is that somebody may or may not have confidence in the fact that whatever the world throws at them, whilst they can't control that, if you had your imposter under a good level of control, you might say, well, whatever the world throws at me, I personally have enough sense of my own knowledge, experience, ability to adapt and be flexible that I will probably be okay. And I think that's a slightly different, to me, that is more around self-esteem and a general sense of your own resilience, which I think is a little bit different to imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome will be more around the things that you can control. So if we take this back to a physio context, I would say imposter syndrome is more around the fact that I have this skill set. I don't know what patient is going to come in next, but I will bluff my way through it, which, a positive spin on that might be, I'm really skilled. I know that I can be flexible and adapt to whatever comes in and I'll be fine, as opposed to I'll keep bluffing my way through it, but there will be a patient one day that I just completely, fluff up on. It will all go wrong. I'll be exposed. There'll be a court case. It'll be a disaster. But yeah, I suppose there is some overlap. But actually, also just going back to your point of how you came onto this show today. So if I was to be really tricksy with you, I could play with that and say, well, all right, Jack, if you say, well, I didn't prepare, I came on last minute, I hadn't checked my tech. So if it went wrong, it's not really my fault because I didn't try. So that feeds into that, as long as I look like I'm just kind of winging it and getting by flying by the seat of my pants, then that's okay. Whereas you could take the view that, yes, I've covered everything I can, I'm going to prepare. If it went wrong, it was the tech problem. I don't know, there's just a slight sense of, as long as I look like I didn't try too hard, then it's okay if it goes wrong.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think there's layers to it though, isn't there? So let's just use that as an example, because there's no need for me to defend that, because that's true. There is something to that in terms of my style as well, never mind the tech, right? There is something quite Teflon about my ability to go, what do I know? And I'm just getting these experts on, and so I'm kind of able to do that. There's something very genuine to me saying that, though, is that I'm such a generalist compared to the specialists I speak to, that I'm not just acting that. However, there is something to be said for the fact that when I'm wrong, I can hold my hands up fairly easily. But there is a massive amount of infrastructure and brand work and learning that I've done over the years that mean that I'm in a situation to tee myself up for it. So on a moment-to-moment basis, I'm coming across as if I'm winging it, but that's purely as a means of poor time management for me to swan in here 30 seconds to go. By the way, Joe did that to me last month, so I'm not going to pretend that that's always one-way traffic. But that layers I'm on about is that there's this sort of scene set of my expertise, right? My genuine uniqueness that comes from me being able to create what I've created, and then because of that, I am flying by the seat of my pants quite often. Like that is happening. I don't think that's necessarily for me to necessarily put a show on, in order to say, so if therefore something goes wrong, I can therefore attribute it to other things. I don't know. It's a funny thing with what is motivating our utterances, what is motivating our behaviour. Is it uncomfortable for us to say, I've worked really hard on this, and this? Like, to some degree, I think it is, and I think that the balance for me is trying to understand what is okay to share and to be proud of, but also then, I'd hate to under-attribute things to good fortune, to good mentorship, to a good team, to the classic footballer interview after every game, where they just won't, they've scored 17 goals, basically dragged the team up by the scruff of their neck and been the only player playing well on that side. The first thing they say is great team performance, right? It's just this constant sense of the societal need for humility. We've talked a bit about that being sometimes a bit false. However, I think there is something to be said for making sure that you get the balance right between acknowledging and attributing the stuff that you've contributed, but also then making sure you appropriately reference and credit those that have supported you and helped you to do it.
And I think the danger is, if you're someone that constantly underplays, then you can never satisfy yourself. So there's this kind of overachievement tendency, which is quite strong in healthcare. So it would play out that you do a course and you get a qualification. If your immediate response is, well, if I got it, then it must be not worth very much because I got it, then the only way to go from that is to do the next course. And of course, it won't get any better. So there is, rather than just celebrating your wins because, we live in an age where it's okay to shout about it and let's all be like celebrities and splash everything all over social media. I think it's the other side is to guard against that continual searching and striving and just pushing yourself possibly to the point of burnout, because you can never actually just accept and own that you're okay and you're successful and you're pretty proficient.
Yeah, I think that's I can so see that, and I hate it. I hate it when I encounter it in otherwise brilliant people on this show, in prep for this show, on our colleagues ahead of Therapy Live, the persuasion that we sometimes have to make for genuinely incredible people to say, do you mind sharing that? And they say, oh, me, are you sure? And they've been very genuine with that. And it pains me. I really don't like it, because I'm just like, God, I just wish you could just exist in the world knowing how brilliant you are. I wish you could see yourself through the eyes I see. But I struggle to apply that to myself, in part because I have a productivity drive that's attempting to, part of what allows me to motivate me is something that is a striving to the nebulous concept of potential, fulfilling potential. And so I'm always trying to do that, and therefore I can't always apply the same rules to myself on that, in part because I'm concerned about what we've talked about on this show, and you've challenged me on before, is this sense or perception that you don't want to come across as arrogant, but also that I worry about, might that have been the fuel in that fire? What happens if you extinguish that? What if I did sort of rest on my laurels and go, look over said little mini digital empire and think, oh yeah, I'm quite pleased with that, and I did that enough to then realise that stopped us kicking on to the next stage. I think that's a paranoia is as much of it. Is that all part of what you and Margaret have discussed and considered to be still amongst the concept of imposter syndrome?
I think it's probably part of the same thing, and you might say, Jack, that you're on a different end of the scale in that it's just drive for better that keeps you going, and I totally relate to that thing of fulfilling your potential. There seems to, my whole life, I've had people telling me that there is this potential, and therefore the subtext is keep going until you fulfill it. Is it your imposter that won't ever accept that you have fulfilled that potential, or is it that potential isn't something that can ever be described as a distinct endpoint, so you're just going to keep going? But I think I've totally lost my train of thought. So if we take people at the other end, so yeah, let's take people coming on this show, for example, and I've had a few conversations, and there are a few people that have commented here that I've had conversations with prior to coming on this show, and I remember the first time before I came on, my heart was pounding, I was dry mouth, I really was nervous about coming on the first time. But the thing is, feeling like a fraud doesn't mean you are a fraud. And I love Margaret's phrase in that you can just let that sit with you and accept that voice is always going to be there, but then make a conscious choice about what you do about it. So my view now about coming on this show or writing articles or sharing things publicly is I care so much about wanting to deliver this message that I will choose to accept that voice is there telling me I'm a bit rubbish and who am I to talk about it and I don't know anything. And I'll just go, yes, okay, fine, you sit there. But my choice today is to ignore that because I want to talk about these things and I want to get out there. So I don't think anyone, particularly not Margot when she talks about it, would suggest that you squash your imposture or you have any illusions that you're ever going to push it away, because it actually serves you pretty well. It's probably the thing that got you where you are now and keeps challenging you and keeps driving you. But you can choose to have a productive relationship with it, where you go, okay, yeah, I hear it. You don't want me to make a complete fool of myself, and I will keep that in check, but I'm going to do this anyway. I mean, she says the statistics for describing these type of imposter syndrome feelings in the normal population are about 70%, if you ask them, and in healthcare workers, it's the high 90s. So to be honest, if you don't feel some level of imposter syndrome, then you're definitely in the minority in healthcare. So we're all dealing with it in some way, shape or form. And people can be on everything from, you know, the point where it completely paralyzes them and stops them doing what they're capable of. And that is a problem, because how many times in healthcare do we see, like you've just described, really brilliant people putting a ceiling on their achievements? And how much do our organizations lose out because these brilliant people are not getting over this thing and going for it?
I think one of the things that speaks to a couple of shows we've done recently, both together and then me separately, is that if we don't find a way to appropriately redress this, the 5% of people that don't have that monkey on their back, that imposter, mixing my metaphors now, aren't I? But they're going to run amok and they're going to take advantage. They're going to sell you shit you don't need. They're going to take your job and they don't deserve it.
Yeah, take the job you should have had.
It's just like so annoying. And I think that that's the thing. And you know, on your show recently, you really appropriately challenged me on some of the accusations that I make regarding cowboys or charlatans, and I've reflected hard on that. And I think that that's because I recognize that statistically, and it's supported here by the data, but also my read of it is that unfortunately they are able to run amok in our industry more than they might do in Citibank, right? It's just the nature of the fact that they encounter more combat there. Whereas unfortunately, there's some people that are otherwise doing brilliant things that don't recognize their own achievements because of imposter syndrome, that mean that they can sometimes get taken advantage of. And that's a massive irritant. What do you think are the best sort of top tips that Margaret was able to give? And we're going to bring the chat up in a section. So please do, those that are commenting, please do continue to. We're going to bring that in a second. My last question for you though, Joe, before we go to that is, what do you feel with the enlightening top tips that she gave with regards to how to actually address that?
Well, some of them we've talked about already, the personal ones. So yeah, develop a compassionate and understanding and tolerant relationship with your imposter. Accept that it's there, accept that it got you where you are today, but do exercise choice about what you choose to act on, how much you choose to believe it, and what you choose to sometimes ignore and ride over. But from an organizational point of view, and so this feeds into the EDI stuff, removing barriers to success, and also trying to foster organizations where there's tolerance for difference and also tolerance for failure. So we've talked many times on the show about the tendencies towards perfectionism in healthcare professionals. So you're less likely to have a problem with people, you know, just not putting the work in and not trying to be good enough. You're going to have more of this problem of people holding themselves back. So I think creating more open conversation around how people actually feel about their work, allowing these kind of discussions to happen in clinics and in departments, but also, and I think as leaders, allowing people just have a go at stuff, accepting that it may not be perfect and it might go wrong. And like I say, having environments that tolerate failure. And then lastly, this feeds into something you talk about a lot, is our ability to debate. So let's stop trying to be one person right, one person be wrong. Let's be more curious about that middle ground of, you know, where we're a bit right and we're a bit wrong. And if you don't know something, you go, oh, that's really interesting. I think you probably know more about this particular field than I do. Can you tell me about that? As opposed to, oh gosh, you sound really intelligent, so I'm going to clam up and not say anything and not get involved in the debate.
This is some lovely comments, and one of them that speaks directly to that, and this is the Think Physio, so it'll be Leanne who's speaking through her business page here, but she said he also thinks it's a bit of a filter. I think that's a really interesting point, is that sometimes that can be for good or for ill. But in this instance, what you've just described there is potentially the ability to recognize and be comfortable within your own filter. So if you're in that discussion with someone that you might find yourself disagreeing with, the ability to say, you seem to know more about this than me, but I know what I know, and I'm going to bring that forward. I'm going to try and channel this topic. I'm also going to move it through my filter, and that's all right as well. It's not as if, you know, the fact that this needs to always be this hierarchy. There is something to be said for what you bring and how you're seeing it and how you're seeing that topic, regardless of whether or not they know more about it than you. You know what you know, and you can apply that, especially with regards to the versatility of skill set that our audience has. As pragmatists, as creative thinkers, as to solving problems, I think it's stupid if people cap their abilities based on that. With a comment here which I loved, which was one of the first ones from Alistair Beverley.
Yeah, I saw that one.
So Ali's recognizing himself in that, and rest assured, Ali, you're one of the people that I was speaking about when I was thinking just whose name should be in lights and who should recognize their own brilliance. So please do take that, mate, because you definitely shouldn't have the imposter syndrome if that is ever holding you back. Even similarly, someone like Katie Napton, this cracks me up. You know, someone like Katie should be able to lean into her incredible skill set. Now, I'm going to be a bit cruel here, Joe, and say, is it something to be said for the fact that it's an easier thing to do once you're sort of worldly wise, a bit older, because of the fact that you're sort of more established? There's something more content with regards to it. I mean, so I hear. I mean, it sounds a bit mean. That's why I said it's naughty. But do you think there's something to be said for that, or is it actually?
Absolutely, there is. Yeah, these grey hairs count for something. There is no way at your age, Jack, that I would have been on this show as a guest or, heaven forbid, a host of anything. Yeah, I've spent a lot of my career working very hard, not talking about it, probably, let's say, being an excellent clinician, but not owning that. And yeah, there is definitely something with experience that I think you just think, gosh, I'm tired of feeling like this. It doesn't seem to be serving anyone. And actually, when I do share stuff and when I do push my comfort zone, the world doesn't end. It's fine. Yeah, I would say absolutely. With a little bit of experience and a little bit of challenging yourself and going into places that feel a bit scary, and then actually it all turns out okay. Yeah, hugely. That's where growth occurs.
No, that's interesting. Liz has said that she suffers with it constantly, especially she came to the profession quite late and it being her second career. Maybe something that's striving to get ahead, feeling behind. I mean, again, Liz, this is one of the interesting things with someone like her.
Yeah.
To me, it just seems a funny one, because how much of that would I want to take off? I'd hate for her to feel like she'd be putting too much on herself there. But similarly, her drive and what she's achieving and her messaging and how inspirational she is, it'd be a shame if any of that got taken, the edge was taken off that, if she didn't have some imposter syndrome. So it can be a positive force in some ways there.
Yeah, but equally from what I've seen of Liz, you know, that you just want to say, forget all of that, you know, it doesn't matter. Get on with what you're saying, it's brilliant. But yeah, such a common problem.
Well, Liz, if you'll come on Chewing It Over to discuss this a bit further, I'd love to sort of offer this correlation. For those that don't know, Liz Bailey was on Physio Matters recently doing a podcast on dance. She's an ex-professional dancer, now, then sports therapist, now physiotherapist. Liz, I'd love to sort of talk about how that might correlate with stage fright. I doubt that once she's on stage and the show must go on and she's performing at her very best, I imagine that imposter sort of leaves her alone, at least for a bit. So please, Liz, if you fancy it, then
there was a good comment from Evie. I only read part of it because I was talking, but it was about luck.
Oh, yeah, brilliant. I'm sorry, Evie, I didn't spot that. What if your success it really is due to luck and the guidance and support of others? So she feels that that's what happened to her. She doesn't feel she's got imposter syndrome, but she just feels that fundamentally that is an accurate analysis of her circumstances.
So Evie, I wonder if you know that phrase that luck is when preparation meets opportunity, which is what I was saying earlier. You know, maybe Evie, you just are really well prepared, and when luck comes along, you're able to take it.
It's interesting because I've got tomorrow on Chewing It Over, I've got Mike Stewart, who's one of my original clinical lead mentor, boss. And the fortune that comes from that, and we might tell that story tomorrow. But I've been telling people recently is that they're asking me, how did you do this, or what would you recommend and stuff. And I try and take as many of those calls as I can fit in. And I always tell this story about the just incredible fortune I've had in just geographical sense of meeting someone like Mike and taking that opportunity. But when I've posed that to Mike over the years, he said, yeah, but think how many band fives I've had over the years. And you took that opportunity.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said for that. And so me and Mike might get stuck into that tomorrow. Might just talk about communication and pain, because that's his whole modus operandi these days. I've also noticed a comment from Friday's guests. So Darren Finnegan and colleagues are coming on Friday on to tune it over. So welcome, Darren. He said that imposter syndrome cultivates curiosity, eagerness to learn, and is better than complacency. He's mentioning Adam Grant book. I'm not aware of that as a book, but I think that cultivating curiosity is something I imagine you'd be into, Joe.
Yeah, can you be curious without imposter syndrome, though?
Well, but as we're saying, some people might. Sometimes it's a useful proxy for you to be able to soul search, in a sense, right? That might be the motivation to look inwards. Without it, sometimes people might not necessarily be curious to study themselves.
Yeah, I mean, Darren, you're not here to defend yourself, but I would possibly say that for me, imposter syndrome sometimes holds me back from being curious.
Okay.
That to be truly curious, you've got to have a sense of freedom and openness to what you're going to find, as opposed to imposter syndrome, which is almost protecting yourself from harm.
That cracks me up. So Darren's going to end up taking up some of his own show on Friday, doing a response to this if we're not careful. So let's not get sucked too far into this. Many thanks to those that have commented. We're in overtime now, so I'm going to wrap this up. But thanks so much for the participation, guys, in the chat and function. It's absolutely brilliant. I also want to just finish with a flourish. And my friend Leanne has said consistency though, Jack, and she was sort of psyching me up to say that me being here every day, the action is pivotal. So she was giving me the classic Leanne pep talk to say, don't talk yourself down, Chew. Thank you for what you're doing. And so I'll take that, Leanne, and I'll finish with that so that I don't neg on myself. But yeah, really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. Please keep your comments coming. We will look at those. They will inform future shows, including Wellbeing Wednesdays. First Wednesday of every month, me and Joe get together. But to be honest, if there's enough comments, enough hunger for it, me and Joe will jump on the show anytime. So we don't need to wait a month. If you guys want more of this, then let us know. Please tune into You Matter, which is out on Sunday, I believe.
Yes,
and if you haven't subscribed already, that's on the Physio Matters Podcast Network. Joe Turner's new show about coaching, self-care, and being your best self within healthcare. And also visit mehab.co.uk, which is Joe's new website, which is out now. And so please go and check that out and follow her work, because it's good stuff, of course. We won't be working with her otherwise. You've got to trust us on this. All right. Anything else to finish on, Joe? We're 5 minutes over time.
Covered it all. Thanks, Jack.
Nice one. Take care.
Bye.
Quick, click the buttons. Where have they gone? Where's my video?